Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight from Washington, Pirates of the Caribbean, Venezuela accusing the U.S. of piracy after American special forces seized a massive oil tanker with video showing them dropping from helicopters, storming the ship. The White House now facing questions like what happens to the captured oil? Will more ships be raided? Why is Vladimir Putin now getting involved? We'll have a live report straight ahead. Plus, a new twist in the Ukraine-Russia peace talk negotiations, a proposal that could potentially end the war, setting one of the biggest sticking points over disputed territory. Also, dueling health care plans failing today in the Senate. Is Congress now out of time to find a fix before premiums spike for millions of Americans? And all eyes on Indiana this evening after a months-long pressure campaign. Republican lawmakers declined to follow President Trump's orders to redraw congressional maps. What the vote says about the president's influence over the party. And breaking news after the bell from one of AI's biggest names, Broadcom, earnings results and a strong forecast sending the stock higher. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick will have the latest in power moves. But we begin tonight with an administration pressed for answers on the seizure of that oil tanker off the Venezuelan coast. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about what is next for the vessel during the White House press briefing earlier today.
The vessel has been seized, as you know, and the Department of Justice did that in conjunction with the Coast Guard and the Department of War. The vessel is currently undergoing a forfeiture process right now. The United States currently has a full investigative team on the ground on the vessel, and individuals on board the vessel are being interviewed, and any relevant evidence is being seized. With respect to the oil,
joining us now with the latest is Bloomberg White House reporter Skylar Woodhouse in studio with us this evening. Skylar, it's great to see you. Will there be more of these? Sounds like it.
Only time will tell, Joe, but what we did learn from Caroline today during the briefing, she also said that the administration will follow the legal process as it pertains to what happens with this oil. The president yesterday kind of joked about what would happen to the oil, and
yes.
President sort of joked, said, guess we'll keep it. But,
right.
It'll be interesting to see what that actually looks like. And then just also, what we're learning right now is the U.S. Has just sanctioned 3 of Maduro's nephews, as well as 6 oil tankers. So this is the U.S. really sort of amping up their pressure campaign against Venezuela.
Well, that could be pretty important if we decide to seize 6 more oil tankers. We're going to have a fleet of them ourselves. So do we have answers to the questions that people are asking? What happens to the oil specifically? The president said, I assume we keep it. How about the crew? How about the boats themselves?
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions swirling right now on sort of what exactly happens. What we do know, it seems like this vessel will then go to a port, but only time will tell what actually happens. I would imagine that those who are, investigating this vessel will have to sort of break it down to, I guess, really check it out.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see what happens. Lots of questions still swirling on if the president will send troops actually into Venezuela. That is something we're very closely watching right now.
Really great reporting, as always, from Bloomberg. Skylar Woodhouse. Skylar, it's great to have you here in the Bureau. And on Capitol Hill today, the Senate rejected a pair of partisan measures addressing the impending expiration of Obamacare subsidies. We told you this was going to happen. The vote's failure expected, clearly, but now it's teeing up a January 1st spike in health insurance premiums for some 20 million Americans. And joining us with details of the votes here in our Washington Bureau, Bloomberg's Erik Wasson. Does this mean we're going over the cliff?
I think the likely scenario is that the premiums will spike, that we'll not be able to come up with a deal. The House is going to tee up some Republican bills. There's one intriguing possibility I'm monitoring where there's a group of moderates, Brian Fitzpatrick is leading this group, who could possibly offer an amendment to whatever comes out of the House leadership. These are probably things like reducing, pharmacy benefit manager ability to skim off the top. If there's an amendment approved, if Democrat leadership somehow game it, you could create a live ball in the Senate where this could see them try to extend it. But I think it's an unlikely scenario. I think it's like 4 or 5% max that would actually happen. So I think we're heading over the cliff. That's certainly what Chuck Schumer was saying, that time is over and people are going to see their premiums.
Well, I guess unless there's some sort of Christmas miracle here, we'll be dealing with this throughout January. Does this increase the chances of a shutdown at the end of the month? Because the CR went through next month, right?
Schumer was kind of saying the toothpaste is already out of the tube. They've tried this. It didn't necessarily work to get the result, although it did highlight the issue and did put it politically in the Republicans' court. And that's what he was saying. This failed vote, 51-48 in the Senate, pretty much allows Democrats to take this to the voters in the midterm elections and say Republicans are the ones that caused this spiking health care.
Fascinating. Here we are again. Erik Wasson, thank you so much. Joining us now with insight live from Capitol Hill, Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York. He's ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, member of the House Financial Services Committee, and so we have a lot to talk about. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. You heard what Erik was just telling us here. It looks like we are going to go over the cliff. Should our viewers and listeners, people who are actually on these plans, these Obamacare plans, should they expect this to be their new reality?
It looks like it. I mean, Democrats have been trying to ring the alarm for a long period of time. And almost for the last 15 years, the Republicans have said that they had an alternative plan, yet no one has seen them produce anything. And this is something that should have been talked about. We've been advocating for it. We've been talking about an extension, if nothing else, to the tax credit for the Affordable Care Act so that it can be figured out, or we'll have more time. Republicans have refused to do that. So it just seems that they, as we've been saying all along, are in complete disarray. And as a result, it's going to hurt millions of American citizens when they see their health care. Sometimes some of them will double. And this is what we were talking about before, and now it's going to become reality.
So the affordability crisis that we've been talking about and the president calls a Democrat hoax, it's about to get worse, right? If we look at this through a wider frame, this feeds into higher costs that people are facing across the board, Congressman.
There's no question. I mean, the American people, and as we saw when the president was in Pennsylvania just recently talking about this is a Democratic hoax, and everyone that was spoken with when they left said this is not a hoax because they know what their pockets feel like, and they know what their insurance plans are looking like, so that they will soon have to make a choice, many of them, of whether they continue health care or not because they may not be able to afford it. And so the crisis is here now that's caused by the President of the United States. And unfortunately, the President is also the de facto Speaker of the House. So the Deputy Speaker follows the Speaker, who happens to be the President, and nothing has been done, and nothing has been at least talked about for an agreement in a bipartisan way. And so now we're on a cliff, no conversation, and guess what? January 30th is not that far behind also.
Well, we just were talking about the possibility of another shutdown, and I don't know if anyone has the appetite for that. But I just want to ask you quickly about one of the options that is under consideration in the House of Representatives, realizing these both failed today in the Senate. There's a discharge petition that's been put up by Brian Fitzpatrick. It's also got a Democrat on this as well. It's Brian Fitzpatrick, as I mentioned, on the Republican side. If there are enough votes here, this could be forced to the floor, Congressman, and it would extend the Obamacare subsidies by a couple of years, but also would add eligibility requirements. Is that something that you would vote for if you had the chance?
Well, I haven't seen it. I would have to see it. I know there's something that they're trying to put together at the last second. I think that, again, we should have had the opportunity to have a dialogue and a conversation, a negotiation, as opposed to what's taking place right now. So I would have to, before we get out of here next week, is to look at it to make a determination. But you can see how Congress is currently operating with this Republican leadership. Everything seems to have to be done by a motion to discharge. We cannot get anything on the floor so that we can vote in regular order. It is, such craziness that's going on. Now, I've been in Washington for a long time. I'm a member of Congress for 27 years, and I've never seen anything like this. And so, though I believe a number of votes. If we had the opportunity to vote for them on the floor, the Speaker and the President has blocked them. And so the only recourse that members are having is to try to work with motions to discharge and get 218 votes. That's what took place with the Epstein vote.
Congressman, I want you to put on your foreign relations cap here and talk to us about what's happening off the coast of Venezuela, because the United States has decided to seize an oil tanker. The president says that we will probably keep the oil. There are questions about what happens to the crew and whether more of these are about to happen. The U.S. has just sanctioned 6 more of these. Is this the way things work now in the Caribbean?
Well, look, they are illegal in the way that it's working now. I think that, number one, you first heard that the president was down off the coast of Venezuela because of drugs. Clearly, by taking this oil tanker, it's not about drugs. And clearly, you should have seen, if you can take an oil tanker in the way that they have, that you don't have to shoot down boats in the way and kill people in the way that they have. So it is not about drugs. It's about regime change to one degree and taking access to Venezuelan oil. Those seem to be the main motivations of the President of the United States. And this is not the way that we generally have historically operated in the United States. This is really how Russia operates. And so we are losing our values, as we've seen from the National Security report that came out that says, Russia, China, and the United States, forget about our friends and allies and how do we work with them. So all of this is coming to a head right now. So I strongly disagree, and I think that the American people disagree. The president should be coming to Congress if this is a war that he's trying to get us into. That's why I do have a bill dealing with a War Powers Act, so that demanding that the president comes and talk to Congress and stop trying to work around Congress to avoid us, so that we can do our oversight responsibilities in an appropriate way.
When does that go to the floor, Congressman, and will you get a single Republican vote?
Well, I think that we would get it. We're working diligent now, talking to other members, and that's why the Speaker refuses to allow the bill on the floor, because he knows if it reaches the floor, we would have a strong bipartisan vote. And so that's why they try to block it and make rules that will not allow the bill to come to the floor at the appropriate time.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Russia. Vladimir Putin is on the phone with Maduro, expressing solidarity today. In fact, they went back to the strategic treaty that was signed in May to talk about how this can be exploited more, confirming their commitment to joint projects in trade, the economy, energy, and other areas. Is Vladimir Putin about to make this more complicated?
Well, he is. I mean, look, and there's some reason why the President of the United States, we see that Russia's already killing Ukrainians on a daily basis, just about. Russia is now joining hands with Nicolas Maduro, and why the President of the United States is not standing strong and making sure that, you talk about using power, to control the situation, yet he just seems to bow down to the will of Russia and whatever Russia says, and Russia can do whatever they want, and it's okay with this administration. But it's not okay with the American people. It's not okay with Democrats in the House and the Senate. And we're going to make sure that we have those voices. And I would hope that some of my Republican colleagues would finally join us and stand with us to hold this president accountable and make sure that we keep the high standards and morals that we have with our European allies and others.
I don't know if that'll cover the seizure of oil tankers like we saw, Congressman, but if this did in fact come from a shadow fleet, if this boat was operating illegally, do we owe that oil back to somebody? And what happens to the crew?
Well, look, I will tell you generally, in all of the time that I've been in Congress before this is done, there is at least with the Intelligence Committee, sometimes with the Armed Services Committee, and sometimes with the Foreign Affairs Committee, and sometimes in a combination thereof, and definitely with both Democrat and Republican leadership in the House, there is a dialogue and conversation. They go in the skiff, or they go down to the White House, and they have a dialogue, and they talk, and they plan, and they at least indicate what they intend on doing. And in this situation, it's just chaos, where you have a president who's just running amok, doing whatever he wants to do, and oftentimes violating the normal states and I believe also violating the rules of law.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about the INVEST Act while you're with us, Congressman, because you've got a lot of small business owners who are watching and listening right now. And I just talked about the state of small business with the head of the SBA, Kelly Loeffler. Here's what she told us.
Between tax cuts, deregulation, fair trade, we see jobs and opportunities coming back to America, and then $18 trillion of investment coming in. A lot of that's going to play out on Main Street, and that's why small business optimism, according to the U.S. Chamber, is at all-time highs. And you've got consumer confidence on the rise again. So consumers know that the best is yet to come.
Of course, what she told us argues with a lot of the data that we're seeing, Congressman. The INVEST Act cuts red tape, expands access to capital. Will that help small business owners get around high prices?
Well, that's what we want to do, because we know that the policies that the president is putting forth now, for example, with his tariffs, if you spoke to any small business, the cost to the small businesses have steadily increased. They're not decreased, they're increased, causing them problems. The instability and the uncertainty of the president's policies is causing and costing small businesses a lot of money. They do not know, they can't, get the right inventory. They don't know how much to buy because how much is going to cost going up. So as I speak to small businesses, this administration's policies have been devastating to them and devastating to the American consumer. And so that's why I was glad to be able to work with some of my Republican colleagues on the Financial Services Committee so that we can do something for small businesses, get access, help them get access to capital, and for those individuals also who have 401ks or IRAs for helping them with their retirements. And so we're trying to make sure that we are reaching to the small business and the average everyday worker, like 62% of them who are invested in the markets. So it's not just the super rich friends of the president that having benefits, but it is the working people of America. And that's what we're trying to do there, because clearly the president's policies are not working.
Well, I know it's a bipartisan effort right now. I'd like to stay in touch with you on that. Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York, we thank you so much for the time today. Coming up, breaking news after the bell. Broadcom shares are on the rise after the AI chip maker's outlook. Top forecasts will have the latest in power moves up ahead. And breaking news tonight out of Indiana, where Republicans have justified President Trump's orders to redraw congressional maps. The effort failed. We'll have much more on this next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. New data showing the U.S. trade deficit narrowing in September to the smallest since the middle of 2020 as exports surged, with the gap shrinking almost 11% from the month earlier. Data coming after the Fed yesterday cut interest rates for the third consecutive meeting as worries over a weakening job market overrode concerns about inflation and the impact of tariffs. For a look at the economic implications of the data, we bring in Bloomberg's Kate Davidson, who joins us here in our Washington bureau. Kate, it's great to see you back. Starting with the trade gap here, is this the side effects of the president's tariff regime?
I think it's definitely affected by these swings in trade policies or trade announcements, right? I think it's less of a signal. The White House, was touting the numbers, saying, look, our tariffs are working, but it's really more about distortions that have kind of stemmed from some of the announcements around tariffs. Particularly, there was this surge in exports of gold, but that followed a lot of imports that had come in ahead of the tariffs previously. So it was really more of a big reversal of that. So there's not a huge signal really to be taken from this data, which is also a bit old because it was delayed from the shutdown.
Right, got it. Well, it's interesting. After what you heard from the Fed chair yesterday, your own observations of the data we have, at least, I wonder what you make of the conversation coming out of the White House on affordability. The president frequently calls it a hoax or a con job, and said so during his speech in Pennsylvania the other night. There's a new poll from the Associated Press that finds the president's handling of the economy has hit a new low. Only 31% of U.S. adults approve of how he's handling the economy. How do we rationalize these two very different framings of what's going on?
Yeah. So I think that overall, as we've reported, and we know the economy is pretty resilient, it's pretty healthy, and the administration has talked a lot about that, overall numbers, pretty good. We'll get a new GDP number the week after next. It's again a little bit delayed from the shutdown, but that's probably going to show that growth was pretty good. But really what we're seeing and hearing a lot about is this idea of a K-shaped economy. Some people are doing really, really well. Some people not doing so well. We know that a lot of Americans are increasingly worried about their personal finances, about job prospects. The labor market hasn't fallen off a cliff, but it's definitely cooling. There's not a lot of firing going on, but not a lot of hiring either. So things are, I think a lot of people are feeling like things are pretty tenuous. And for this White House, I think the president has always managed, despite projecting the idea of this very wealthy businessman persona, he's managed to connect with a lot of voters who are middle or lower class voters. With these populist messages, and I think this suggests maybe some of that is eroding a little bit.
Interesting. How important will holiday shopping be? If consumers are propping up this economy to the extent they are, how important will be holiday shopping as a data point?
I think it's important. It's certainly something we always look at because it speaks to how comfortable and secure consumers feel, right? If people feel like their prospects are pretty good, maybe they'll get a pay increase early next year, they might go out and spend more, right? It just says a lot about their personal comfort level. I mean, one thing that we found interesting is that younger consumers, for example, we're hearing a lot about how their job prospects are more tenuous, and yet they are still going out and spending. We saw on Black Friday a lot of the brands that cater to younger consumers reported doing very well. Yeah. So it's hard to predict, even when sentiment is bad, what people are actually going to go out and do.
That's right. Really interesting, as always. Great to spend some time with Bloomberg's Kate Davidson. Thank you so much, Kate, for the insights. We want to turn to breaking news after the bell now. We told you about strong earnings news from Broadcom. A beat and raise just a day after Oracle disappointed investors with its quarterly report, throwing the whole AI trade back into question. But look at this. We just saw a late surge turn into a loss. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick has more in Power Moves live from New York. What happened, Romaine?
Well, the story is kind of similar to one we saw with Oracle. You have a company that beat on the top and bottom line, a company that says that it sees its AI chip sales, Joe, doubling over the next year. But of course, the problem with all these new orders is you have to find the money to actually build out that stuff, and that causes a lot of concern. Broadcom in a much better position than Oracle on a financial basis, not as much debt, a lot more free cash flow, but investors are much more focused on the fundamentals of these companies and whether they can actually make good on what is now, Joe, year to date, $500 billion, $500 billion of commitments to the AI infrastructure build out, and a lot of skepticism creeping back into this market that maybe those targets can't be met. I want to illustrate the point, and you take a quick look at the broad market. This was a day where we did see the S&P 500 hit a fresh record high. But it's been quite some time, more than a month, since we saw the NASDAQ 100 or the MAG 7 reach a record high. The last time that was done was back on October 29th. There's been a rotation away from the big tech names. It's why we see the Russell 2000, the small cap stocks, hit a record high today, third straight record high since late October. Why we see the S&P 400 mid caps, third straight record high since October. And it's why we see the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit another record high, third record high since October. That's leaving behind those big tech stocks. And a lot of questions now, Joe, as to whether the AI trade might have peaked. I don't know if you are still a subscriber to Time Magazine. I don't know if anyone's still a subscriber to Time Magazine, but they had a new cover today of the person of the year. And the person of the year was, well, 8 people, the titans of AI, as they do them, recreating that iconic 1932 photograph, lunch atop a skyscraper. You're looking at Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, Sam Altman, Lisa Su, Dario Amodei, Fifi Lee, and a couple others here. And Joe, a lot of people now saying, could this be the curse? The magazine curse? Is it all over?
Just put the mirror back on the cover or pick one of them. I don't get it. Maybe story of the year? I don't know.
I'm with you, Joe.
Romaine, thanks. Tomorrow could be bumpy, it sounds like. Romaine Bostick live in New York. Big part of our program here every night on Balance of Power. Coming up, U.S. forces intercept, seize a sanctioned oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. We'll have more next right here on Bloomberg.
The vessel has been seized, as you know, and the Department of Justice did that in conjunction with the Coast Guard and the Department of War. The vessel is currently undergoing a forfeiture process right now. The United States currently has a full investigative team on the ground, on the vessel, and individuals on board the vessel are being interviewed and any relevant evidence is being seized. With respect to the oil, that's a different issue. As you know, Peter, the vessel will go to a U.S. port, and the United States does intend to seize the oil. However, there is a legal process for the seizure of that oil, and that legal process will be followed.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we heard from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt earlier today discussing the fate of the oil tanker that the U.S. seized off the coast of Venezuela. Attorney General Pam Bondi last night posting footage of the seizure on X. Look at this if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, saying the FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. Coast Guard, and Pentagon executed a seizure warrant. There you see special forces rappelling out of a helicopter to board that vessel. They were not met with resistance, and there were no casualties aboard. We have a lot of questions, much like you probably do, about what happens next. And for the latest, we bring in Bloomberg's Erik Martin, who I will remind broke this story. We learned of the seizure from Erik's reporting before it was confirmed by the president yesterday. So we're going to keep the oil. What happens to the crew?
Joe, that's a question I have not yet heard answered, but what has been fascinating here to see is we saw actually an additional step today from the Trump administration in this broad approach towards sanctioning and putting pressure on Venezuela. We saw nephews of Nicolás Maduro re-sanctioned. They had sanctions taken off. They were re-sanctioned today. We also saw sanctions put on additional tankers. And so everyone expecting that this may not be the only action we see in terms of enforcement and seizing a tanker in the Caribbean. We know that there's this ghost fleet that helps to illegally export oil from Venezuela. And so this is someplace that sanctions are only as good as the enforcement of them. And so we're expecting potentially to see this as a tool, an enforcement tool used again potentially by the administration in its approach towards the regime.
Amazing. We did hear from the Venezuelan government called the seizure a barefaced robbery and an act of international piracy. The U.S. is in the pirate business?
Well, certainly we've seen a lot of rhetoric going back and forth between the two sides and a defensive response from Venezuela whenever there's been U.S. action and assertive action from the U.S. in terms of whether it's strikes on more than 20 boats now, taking more than 80 lives of suspected and alleged drug traffickers, or things like President Trump saying that Venezuelan airspace is closed, or the foreign terrorist organization designation of the Maduro regime, the cartel of the Suns, as we saw last month. All of this, the Venezuelan regime has, of course, rejected and said that they want peace and they want dialogue.
Yeah, great. You've had a big week. Great reporting, and thank you for bringing it to us. Erik Martin here in Washington. For more on what we've been talking about here, the legality of the latest action from the administration of the Caribbean, we bring in the voice of retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rachel VanLandingham, former JAG officer and military lawyer. She is currently a professor of law at Southwestern Law School. Professor, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us. Was the seizure of this tanker legal?
On its face, it sure looks like it. We had a warrant issued by a U.S. federal court. We had sanctions in place, actually a pretty comprehensive regime against both this particular tanker and as well as numerous sanctions against the Venezuelan government and nation going back to 2005. But against this tanker, there were sanctions against it going back to 2022, in fact, for allegedly illegally smuggling oil back and forth from Iran and Venezuela. And as we heard the press secretary say just earlier, that there are forfeiture procedures. I mean, that's pretty standard. And in fact, the United States has seized oil before pursuant to sanctions, and then had sold the oil and had the money distributed to actually victims of terrorism regarding Iranian oil. So I expect to see something similar here.
Really interesting. Now that we understand a half dozen more tankers have been sanctioned, Professor, should we expect a half dozen more seizures?
Well, it does seem convenient that this one, that even though it's been sanctioned since 2022, this tanker was seized right off of Venezuela, of course, within the greater context of over 15,000 U.S. Armed Forces personnel now stationed and deployed outside of Venezuela, including the United States' largest aircraft carrier. So the pressure is being ratcheted up, as we also heard from earlier, the boat strike campaign, in which over 22 boats and almost 90 individuals have actually been killed, seemingly outside of any kind of due process, unlike the due process that was employed for this tanker. And the precision boarding and interdiction and seizure of that tanker. Hats off to the amazing United States Coast Guard and the full teamwork there of the United States Armed Forces showed that it can interdict and detain individuals anytime it wants to. So I hope it starts to do that against these low-level drug smugglers as well. So it'll be interesting to see, because at some point, if you seize enough tankers, and that's the primary monetary flow into the Maduro regime, at some point, are we going to engage in a blockade of Venezuela? Because that ratchets it up to war. I mean, a blockade is an act of war. So it's going to be interesting to see if this is going to be piecemeal, or if this is, signs of more to come and more to come soon.
Really interesting. So, we heard coming into our conversation here from Caroline Levitt, who said that we're going to be keeping the oil. President Trump was asked about this by reporters yesterday. He was just coming up with that answer on the spot. Listen to what he said.
We're interested in the seizure of this tanker. Well, what happens to the oil on that ship?
Well, we keep it, I guess.
Where does it go? What port does it go to?
Well, you have to follow the tanker. You're a good newsman. Just follow the tanker.
Do you know where it's going?
Follow it. Get a helicopter and follow the tanker.
Is it true it's going to?
But I assume we're going to keep the oil.
He said, I guess we're going to keep it. And then later, I assume we're going to keep the oil. Was there a plan going into this?
I'm sure there was, but those kind of details usually don't rise to the level of the president. He trusts his folks to execute the law, hopefully here properly, and it sounds like they will. The United States has confiscated items that were ill-gotten gains, so to speak, illegal oil. And again, we have, and it goes through court. The government's going to have to prove that oil was being illegally smuggled, essentially in violation of U.S. federal law, and the court will issue its order and usually just goes back to the U.S. Treasury. Again, depending on which particular sanctions regime that they're going to cite for this particular seizure, depending on what's in that warrant. It'll be interesting to see where the money goes. For example, earlier Iranian oil has been seized and has been awarded to victims of terrorism. For victims of terrorism that were, state-sponsored terrorism by Iran. So either way, it's going to go into the U.S. federal coffers.
I want to ask you, Professor, about the string of strikes that we have seen against alleged drug boats. I think you referred to them already, and the legality around these actions. It's something that I asked retired General Wesley Clark about yesterday on Balance of Power. Here's what he said.
Apparently, these people were involved in shipping drugs. That's not the major source of drug shipments into the United States, of course. And some of it may not have been coming to the United States. In this case, apparently it was going to Suriname and then maybe to Europe. But the fact is, the rules of international law, maritime traditional practices, seamen stranded at sea get picked up. They don't get killed. It's a combination of a plan and then opportunism. But the idea clearly is to put the pressure on Maduro and get him out of town and out of the hemisphere.
What's your reaction to what the general said, Professor? And as a former JAG officer, are you surprised that there hasn't been more demand or there hasn't been more evidence presented? I guess there's a lot of demand right now. We just haven't seen it, that these are, in fact, drug boats.
Well, I mean, I think the American people are, pretty busy and distracted, and they're just seeing these strikes, but they're not seeing the after effects and actually the individuals being killed, right? I mean, I have two things regarding what General Clark just said. First of all, the entire campaign of claiming that this is an armed conflict against drug cartels is unlawful. Yeah. It goes against what the United States traditionally views as law enforcement interdiction missions by the United States Coast Guard, and it goes against international law. These groups are not engaged engage in any kind of violence, protracted, intense violence against the United States, such as Al-Qaeda was, right? So Al-Qaeda was an armed group we were in an armed conflict with. So the entire construct is unlawful and it's wrong. And it's asking and it's ordering our service members to engage in illegality, pure and simple. And it's not very effective because what you need to do is interdict and then detain, and then you interrogate, you interview these low-level alleged drug smugglers so you can go all the way to the top. So this is not even the most effective and smart way to go about this. And second of all, the second boat strike, from all the reporting, sure sounds like those folks were shipwrecked. It doesn't matter if they were Al-Qaeda, for example. Once they are on, if we're going to say this was a war, once they are out of war, they're shipwrecked. They are protected individuals unless they're actually engaged in hostilities. They had no weapons. They had no radio. They were desperately trying to clamber on top of their boat. They should have been protected. Right. And if this had been a war, that would have been a war crime. And since it's not a war, it's actually just murder.
It's a case of murder. So if you were handed this case to defend as a JAG officer, would you take it? Could you defend it?
Of course, I would take it. Everyone, I mean, due process requires, and our Constitution requires the zealous defense. And I would have to see what kind of situation these individuals were in, what kind of orders they were given, what facts they were actually operating off of. But I do believe Admiral Bradley has explaining to do, and Secretary Hegseth, first and foremost, has explaining to do to the American people. Why is he ordering our service members to just kill summarily outside of armed conflict? That's not what the United States military does. And the United States military doesn't kill individuals that are considered protected persons, that are out of any kind of fight. Not that this drug running was actually a fight. So of course I would defend them. I was a defense counsel at the trial level and at the appellate level. And I would like to see the legal memo that was written by the Department of Justice that supposedly rationalizes this entire campaign. I think that.
Do you think we'll ever see the video? Will we see the video of the second strike? At one point, President Trump said, "Well, will we?" is the question, because it's up to Pete Hegseth now, and well, we haven't seen it yet, Professor.
Well, it will be interesting to see what kind of pressure the Senate Armed Services Committee brings, because the Republican leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Wicker, has continued to say he wants hearings, he wants an investigation, he wants to get to the bottom of this. So there's some bipartisan pressure right now on Secretary Hegseth. And by the way, there's U.S. federal law, which is about to be signed regarding the annual spending bill for the Pentagon, actually cut Secretary Hegseth's travel budget by 25% if he doesn't release the exords, executing the orders for this operation of boat strikes, and if he doesn't release the video.
It's about time we talk to a lawyer about all this stuff. Rachel VanLandingham, former JAG officer, professor of law at Southwestern Law School. Thanks very much. We might call you back. Next, breaking news out of Indiana, where lawmakers, including Republicans, have defied President Trump's pressure to redraw its congressional maps. This happened a short time ago. We'll discuss the significance of this moment with our political panel coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. We'll turn back to the latest action on Capitol Hill today with our political panel in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. A federal judge ordering the immediate release of Kilmar Obrego Garcia, the Maryland resident at the center of a political and legal immigration battle after a wrongful deportation to El Salvador earlier this year. The ruling judge found the U.S. lacked legal grounds to keep Obrego Garcia in custody, saying immigration detention cannot be used as a form of punishment. The judge also noting U.S. officials failed on making progress to find a legal country to deport Obrego Garcia, despite his willingness to be sent to Costa Rica, which also agreed to take him. The latest plan to deport the man to Liberia has also been blocked by a judge. The Justice Department failing again to secure a grand jury indictment against New York State Attorney General Letitia James over mortgage fraud claims. Prosecutors have been seeking to renew charges against James after a federal judge dismissed a case against her last month, saying that prosecutor Lindsay Halligan had been improperly appointed. The initial charges following a consistent campaign by Trump for legal action against James after she prosecuted him and his real estate company for fraud. And the Indiana Senate rejecting a congressional redistricting plan backed by President Trump today that would have given Republicans an advantage in all 9 of the state's House districts. It wasn't close. In a 19-31 vote, the chamber struck down the proposed map, which would have targeted the only 2 Democrats representing the state in Congress. The vote seen as a setback for President Trump's nationwide push to give Republicans an edge in next year's midterm elections, boost the party's odds of keeping control of the House, where it currently holds a narrow majority. Let's bring in the panel. Joining us now with reaction to these stories and more, Democratic strategist Arshi Siddiqui, founder CEO Bellwether Government Affairs, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camooso Miller, Senior Vice President, Rock Solutions, host of the Friday Reporter podcast. It's great to see both of you here. So a major blow, we're told, on redistricting, but of course Texas is already leading the charge on this. Will this be precedent for other states, or maybe cover for other states led by Republicans to say no?
I think that Washington has lost sight of how much power the states have. When you work in state government, which I did for nearly 10 years of my life, there is nothing that's more frustrating than having Washington tell you how to do your business. And so this is on first read, right? But to me, it feels a little bit like Washington tried to tell Indiana how to do their business, and Indiana said, thanks very much, we're going to do it our way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's my initial reaction to that.
Well, Mike Braun never loved the idea of the Republican governor to begin with. Did Donald Trump find the line in Indiana?
Well, I think they were reluctant from the beginning, right? They didn't think it was a good idea. And
they were brought to Washington, and they were given a talking to about this.
There were some Truth Social posts. The president and the VP have been very aggressive. So I don't think this is over yet. Because I don't think the president is walking away from this. And I think if you do look at even the timeline on this redistricting effort, it was very interesting because it was immediately you pass this, signature Republican reconciliation bill, and then you go straight to redistricting. So I think we're going to see the effort on redistricting intensify on the Republican side.
It'll intensify, which means Democrats will answer?
I think Democrats have done a good job of holding their own and acting in a defensive manner.
I want to ask you both about what happened today on Capitol Hill and specifically in the Senate. 2 swings at the ball, 2 misses, Democrat plan, Republican plan to deal with the expiration of Obamacare subsidies. One of them, the Democrats' plan, would have extended. The Bill Cassidy plan for Republicans would have taken a different approach with health savings accounts. It really doesn't matter, Lisa, because they both failed. And everyone today is telling us that we're going over the cliff. Millions of people will see their premiums rise next month. Is that the case?
It sure feels that way, Joe. And it's just a reminder that this is not an easy issue to have to deal with. That's why, we've been going at this for so long. Obamacare, there was a reason why that was controversial, and it continues to be called Obamacare, is because it ends up being political, and it ends up being very difficult to solve. The only people that suffer here are the people that are going to have their premiums go up. And that's really that's the worst part about today's news.
Well, the political fallout could be dramatic. Not only the reverberations that we could see in the midterm elections, but also right here in Washington, with government funding set to expire at the end of January. I talked to Brendan Boyle about this today, the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, about whether we see a government shutdown once again in light of this, in light of Republican rescissions packages, maybe another reconciliation bill. Here's what he said.
I certainly don't want a government shutdown. I think it'd be enormously costly to the country, and will do everything I can to prevent one. But the issue of rescissions remains, and my essential point remains intact and valid. And I even have privately a number of Republican members, especially those in the Appropriations Committee, who come up and voice to me their frustration that we follow the process, we follow the law, we put together packages, we vote for them in good faith, and then you have a White House and Office of Management and Budget Director who comes around the very next day and does these rescissions.
Now, we don't know if there will be another rescissions package, although the administration has promised that they'll be working on them. Is that enough to really shut down the government again?
Listen, I am optimistic and hopeful, but I think, in this last debate, this rescissions aspect was really left in the wayside. I think the rescissions efforts by the administration have been big poison pills for Democrats, because if you can't cut a deal and rely on that deal, then what are you doing? So I think then we move to actually no discussions or negotiations, as you recall.
Right. Yeah.
And now we're in a place where we have another looming deadline.
Well, it's interesting because everyone who comes on the air, lawmakers all say, hey, no, there's no appetite for a shutdown. We just went through the longest in history. Americans can't pay the price. But what if we sleepwalk into a shutdown again? If there are that many factions in the House that are giving the Speaker a hard time? Republicans are upsetting Democrats. What are the odds?
It feels more and more likely that a shutdown is imminent.
Really?
Yes, because as much as there's not an appetite for it, there's inaction everywhere in Washington right now on Capitol Hill. So if they can't figure out how to, and the holidays, by the way, are all in the middle of all of that. So folks have to go home. It just feels like the clock is running out. And so unless some sort of deal is struck, I think that it feels, even though we don't want it to happen, I think it feels like a shutdown is very likely.
Wow. That's scary to hear you say, because you're pretty good at predicting some of these things. And the Speaker, you worked for a former Speaker of the House. I realize has one of the hardest jobs in Washington, if not the country, but he is not making many people happy in the House. When you look at the number of folks who are criticizing the Speaker, the 5 families are one thing. When you consider Nancy Mace, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Elise Stefanik, who say that he's not treating women respectfully in the House. President Trump was asked about all of this at the White House yesterday. He was quick to defend the Speaker. Listen.
I think Mike Johnson is great. You know, he's had a majority of 2, 3, 4, then back to 2. We actually had 1. So we were 1 heart attack away from disaster. So everybody prayed for everybody's health. I think Mike Johnson's been a fantastic Speaker. I mean, a very hard job because, you know, when you have a small majority. I think Mike Johnson's been a great Speaker. I think few people could have done that job.
Speaker of the House knows what it's like to be a heart attack away from disaster. That's been the balance of his career, holding the gavel. Is the president right?
Yes, he's right. I know. You're surprised. You're as surprised as I am. But Mike Johnson is doing a great job. This is the hardest speakership yet, right? Can you think about a more fractured House? Republicans and Democrats, I mean, everybody is fractured on all sides. Mike Johnson is outperforming on every single, I mean, NDAA looks like it may be on its way to success based on what happened yesterday. Mike Johnson is, while I hear all of these other things, I think Elise Stefanik is running for governor. I think she needs to separate herself from the Congress. I think a lot of this is political, and I think that ultimately he is the best guy for the job, and there's no one else who could do it better right now.
Well, the latter part of your answer is important. Is there anyone else who would even want that job? We just talked about the potential for Speaker Johnson to be fired so many times that it doesn't seem to ring true anymore.
Well, I just think it's an audience of one, really. I mean, I think the president disproportionately is going to decide who the Speaker of the House is going to be. And I think as long as he has his support and endorsement, I think Mike Johnson is in good shape.
Agree.
Are you as fearful about a shutdown as Lisa was? I was struck by your answer there, Lisa. Imminent shutdown.
I'm a little bit less fearful from the perspective on, I think from the Democratic perspective, the issue of health care was put on the table and in a very robust way. If nothing happens by January 1, then that will be an issue that will carry into the midterms. So I think health care is one piece, but the affordability issue will continue. So I think Democrats will continue to focus on that. But I do think that the appetite to actually get back to some sort of bipartisanship is there, and there's no reason to relitigate the Affordable Care Act if it gets resolved.
Sure, ever the optimist. If we go over the cliff, if there's no solution to premiums rising, do Democrats win the House?
I think they win the House regardless.
Really?
It feels like yes, it feels very much like it's really tough math. I think the issues are really difficult. I think regardless of what the facts are, Republicans have the affordability issue that takes people into the polls, and they're unhappy with how expensive everything is.
I would counter that a little bit, just because I think Republicans are masters of, lowering expectations. So a year is a long time, so there's still a lot of work to be done.
All right, no predictions of a blue wave yet. Arshi, Siddiqui, Lisa Camooso Miller, thank you for a great panel. And check out the Washington Edition newsletter to follow up on all the stories we've been discussing. You can find it on the terminal and online. Thank you for joining us once again on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.